why you attract people who don't value you. Carl Jung observed that the people who wound us are rarely strangers to the psyche. They are old acquaintances, met again in a new face, dressed differently, speaking a different accent, but running the very same errand. Before we go any further, here is the seed of the whole matter. Carl Jung wrote in Ion, "When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate." That line comes from the Collected Works, Volume 9, Part 2, paragraph 126. And Jung would stop you right there if he could, and ask you to notice what that sentence refuses to let you believe. It will not let you believe in bad luck. It will not let you believe in a cruel dating pool or a shortage of decent people. It says something colder than that, and somehow kinder. What you have not made conscious in yourself, you will meet outside yourself, wearing a stranger's face, and calling itself your type. So if you have quietly wondered why the same coldness keeps finding you in new clothing, this is not superstition. This is the psyche's oldest law. So let this settle in you for a moment. I notice the pull before I question it. I stop calling it chemistry. When it is really an old ache, finding a familiar shape, I choose to look at the pattern instead of only the person standing in front of me. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. If something in that just landed, type the 2 words, "face it," in the comments below. Not as a performance for anyone watching, just a private nod to yourself that you are ready to actually look at this, instead of living it out one more time. The first key is this. The pattern you keep repeating is not a character flaw, it is a complex acting on your behalf. Carl Jung used a very specific word for this. He called it a complex, not in the loose way we use it now, not shyness about your nose or your height, but a cluster of memory and feeling and expectation that has split off from the rest of the mind and formed what he called a splinter psyche, small autonomous personality living inside the larger one, with its own memory, its own logic, its own agenda. And when the right conditions appear, it does not ask your permission, it simply steps forward and starts making decisions in your name. Picture something very ordinary for a moment. Imagine a man scrolling through messages on an average Tuesday night. 3 people have written to him. One is kind and clear and asks how his day went and actually waits for the answer. One is pleasant but unremarkable, and one has not replied to his last text in 4 days and finally sends a single distracted line. And notice which message his thumb goes back to reread twice. Notice which one he half composes a reply to, deletes, and rewrites. That is not taste. That is not a preference formed by careful reasoning. That is a complex reaching for the exact temperature it was trained on long before he ever learned to spell the word love. This is why you can sit across from someone who barely looks up from their phone, who answers in half sentences, who seems to be doing you a favor by being there at all, and feel something in your chest lean toward them anyway, not in spite of the coldness, but strangely because of it. That lean is not you failing to have standards. That lean is a complex recognizing its favorite weather. And here is the part most people skip past too quickly. The complex does not announce itself as a complex. It disguises itself as instinct, as gut feeling. As this one just feels different, so it goes unquestioned for years, decades even, quietly steering choice after choice, while you sincerely believe you are the one choosing. So before you spend one more year blaming your judgment or blaming the pool of available people, consider the possibility that a part of you has been given the wheel without your knowledge. And that part of you learned its preferences a very long time ago, in rooms you may not even remember clearly. This is not an accusation. Jung was careful never to make it one. He simply insisted that we look. I stop mistaking the driver for the passenger. The second key is this. The complex has a favorite stimulus word, and it is not a word at all. It is a person's whole manner. Jung discovered this quite literally. In his early years at the Burkholzli Hospital, he ran what came to be called the word association experiment. He would read a subject a plain word, table, mother, money, kiss, and timed their response with a stopwatch. Most words came back in under 2 seconds, but every so often, a word would land wrong, the answer would come slow, or strange, or the subject would stumble, or forget the word entirely a few minutes later, when asked to repeat it. Jung called these disturbances the fingerprints of a complex. The stopwatch was catching something the conscious mind could not hide, and what fascinated him most was not the delay itself, it was how ordinary the trigger word usually was. Not violence, not tragedy. Just table, just mother, just a small plain sound that happened to touch a buried wire. I want you to take that literally and apply it to your own life for a moment. Because the same mechanism runs in how you meet people, only the stimulus word is not spoken aloud. It is a certain quality of distance, a certain flavor of almost caring, a slight delay before someone chooses you. Imagine a man scrolling through messages late at night. One reply comes in warm and immediate, full sentences, real questions, and he answers it quickly, almost carelessly, because nothing in his chest has been touched. Then a second message arrives, short, a little dry, sent 2 hours later than it should have been, and something in him sits up. He reads it 3 times. He considers his reply for 10 minutes. He feels, for the first time all evening, something like stakes. That shift is not taste. It is a stopwatch running somewhere beneath his awareness, timing his reaction the way Jung once timed a patient's hesitation over the word mother, and where a stranger's nervous system might register that 2-hour delay as a small warning. He registers it as importance, because somewhere earlier in his history, distance and importance got wired together. Maybe it was a parent who loved him but was hard to reach. Maybe it was a house where affection had to be earned through performance. Maybe it was simply a room where he learned that attention had to be chased to count as real. Whatever the original scene was, the complex formed around it, and it has been listening ever since, for that exact combination of nearness and withholding. So when someone offers him steady, plain, uncomplicated regard, the complex does not recognize it. It does not fire. It stays quiet, bored even, and he walks away calling it boring too. And here is the part Jung would want you to sit with longest. The complex is not lying to you out of malice. It is reporting faithfully from an old map. On that map, warmth without distance was never tested, so it cannot be trusted yet. I learn to hear my own stimulus word before it chooses for me. The third key is this. If you doubt any of this, do not take it from theory. Take it from a single ordinary week. Because theory is easy to argue with, and a week is not. A week is just what actually happened. Jury of one, no interpretation required. So imagine a woman moving through her days without any sense that a pattern is running her at all. On Monday, someone new messages her. Warm enough, clearly interested, plainly kind in the way he asks about her day, and actually waits for the answer. And she feels almost nothing, a polite flatness. She tells a friend he seems nice, but there is no spark. Notice that word nice, spoken almost as an apology. On Tuesday, an old contact resurfaces, someone who takes 2 days to answer texts, who is affectionate in bursts, and then goes quiet, for reasons never explained, and her whole chest lights up the second his name appears on the screen. She calls it excitement. On Wednesday, she catches herself checking her phone every few minutes, not with the calm of someone expecting a reply, but with the low hum of someone waiting to be chosen. Count the minutes if you want the honest number. Some part of her has been recruited into a kind of unpaid labor, watching a door that may or may not open. On Thursday, he finally answers. Offhand, half interested, 3 words where 10 were owed, and the relief she feels is enormous, entirely out of proportion to what was actually said. That gap between the size of the relief and the size of the message is the whole diagnosis, right there, if she could only see it. On Friday, she meets the steady one again, the one from Monday, and for a moment, she almost sees it. Why does calm feel like nothing, and why does uncertainty feel like electricity? She even says it out loud to herself in the car, half a question, and then lets it go, because the light changes and the moment passes, but the week ends and the noticing fades, and by Saturday she is already composing the next message to the one who barely answers, rereading it twice before sending, wondering if it sounds too eager. Jung would not call this bad luck running through her days. He would call it a complex being fed daily, meal by meal, without her once tasting what it actually was. And here is the part worth sitting with longer than feels comfortable. This is not a woman with poor judgment. Her judgment about nearly everything else in her life may be excellent. Sharp with money, careful with friendships, wise about her health. It is only here, in this one narrow corridor, that the old wiring takes the wheel. Because complexes are precise. They do not run your whole life. They wait for their one exact cue, and then they run that single corridor perfectly, every time. I want you to hold your own week up against hers for just a moment. Pause here if you can, and pick one real person from your own recent memory, someone who barely reached for you and somehow held your attention completely. Sit with the shape of that pull, not the story you tell about why he was special, not his job, or his laugh, or the one good conversation you keep replaying. Just the raw shape of wanting more from someone who was giving you less. That shape has a history, and the history is older than he is, older than this year, older maybe than you can consciously reach. I watch my own week, instead of only my own excuses. The fourth key is this, and it returns us to where we began. Jung wrote elsewhere, in the Collected Works Volume 8, complexes can have us, not the other way around. And he did not mean this as a poetic flourish, he meant it as clinical description. In that same early period at the Burgholzli, there is a case recorded in his writing on the association method from 1910. A small sum of money had gone missing, 70 francs, and Jung ran the word association test on the group of people who might have taken it. One man's reaction times to certain words connected to money and guilt and hiding were disturbed in exactly the pattern Jung had come to recognize: slowed responses, odd substitutions, failures of memory on words he should have answered instantly. Confronted gently with the pattern rather than an accusation, the man confessed, "What strikes me about that story is not the theft, it is the timing." The man had not decided, in any conscious sense, to give himself away. A complex had been constellated, meaning triggered into activity, by the presence of certain words, and it acted through him faster than his ego could organize a defense. I want you to sit with that word constellated for a moment, because it is not the same as deciding. A decision has a little space around it. A moment where you could have gone the other way. Constellation has no such space. It is closer to a switch being thrown. Imagine a man at his kitchen table in the evening. 2 messages arrive on his phone, within the same minute. One from someone steady, who has never once left him wondering where he stands. The other from someone who answered his last 3 texts, a day late, and offered no reason. And notice, before he has even read either message, which one his hand reaches for first. That is not preference. That is not taste. That is a complex being constellated by tone alone, by the mere shape of a name on a screen, moving his hand before his thinking has entered the room at all. Now bring that same stopwatch Jung used at the Burgholzli into your own evenings, the slight lag before you reply to someone kind, as though some part of you has to check with an inner committee before allowing warmth to be received, and the strange quickness with which you answer someone cold, no lag at all, an instant, eager response. These are not choices made in the light of day. These are complexes firing exactly as Jung's subject's fingers moved across a table without their permission. And here is the sentence worth sitting with again. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. That is not a curse laid on you from elsewhere. That is a description of exactly what a complex does when it is left in the dark. It stops being a feeling and starts being your circumstances. It stops being something you carry and becomes, instead, something that seems to simply happen to you, again and again, dressed up as chance. I stop calling my complex my fate. Friday teachings only reach the people who are actually subscribed. If this kind of seeing matters to you, stay close, so tomorrow's key finds you too. The fifth key is this, and it is the one worth slowing all the way down for, because it does not ask one question, it asks three. And each one turns the same key a little further into the lock. First, consider where this particular complex actually comes from. Jung did not believe complexes appear from nowhere, out of some flaw stitched into your nature. He traced them back to what he called feeling-toned experiences, moments charged with more emotion than the child's mind could safely process at the time. A parent who loved you, but disappeared into moods for days at a stretch. A house where you learned that your needs were an inconvenience to be timed carefully. A sibling who got the warmth you were quietly rationed. None of these need to have been dramatic. Jung was careful to say, the quiet wounds often do the deepest work, precisely because no one around you ever named them as wounds at all. They were simply the weather of childhood, the temperature of the only home you had, and the complex that formed around that weather did not form to punish you later in life, it formed to help you survive the room you were actually in. It became expert, almost brilliant, at reading distance, at earning small scraps of attention through effort, at staying alert for the exact moment warmth might be withdrawn again without warning. That expertise did not retire the day you moved out or grew up. It kept working quietly underneath everything, looking for situations where its particular skill would still be needed. Imagine a man who grew up with a father who praised him only after some visible achievement, a good grade, a won game, a job well done, and went silent the rest of the time. That man does not consciously decide, as an adult, to chase approval. He simply finds himself drawn, again and again, to people who dole out warmth in exactly that rhythm, plentiful when earned, absent otherwise, and he calls the resulting anxiety chemistry. Now imagine the mirror of that story. A woman who grew up watching her mother go quiet and cold for days, whenever she was disappointed. No shouting, no scene. Just a long withdrawal that had to be waited out. And this woman grows into someone who feels almost nothing for steadiness, but comes fully alive the moment a partner goes quiet on her for a day or two. Some old muscle in her starts working immediately, calculating, softening her own edges, trying to be good enough to bring the warmth back. She is not choosing this. She is rehearsing a scene she has rehearsed since she was very small. Which brings us to the second consideration. Why does the psyche keep seeking out precisely what once hurt it? This looks like self-sabotage from the outside. Plenty of people will tell you so. But Jung would ask you to look closer before accepting that verdict. The complex is not choosing pain for its own sake. It has no taste for suffering as such. It is choosing the familiar, and to an unconscious structure formed in childhood, familiar and safe are treated as though they were the same thing, even though they plainly are not. The nervous system does not compare a new partner against some abstract standard of kindness read out of a book. It compares him, quietly and instantly, against the shape of home. And if home was a place where love had to be chased down and proven for, then a partner who also has to be chased will always register as more like love than one who simply, plainly, stays. This is why steady, plentiful affection can produce something close to suspicion in a person carrying this particular complex, some quiet inner voice insisting this is too easy. Something must be wrong here. That voice dresses itself up as instinct, as discernment, as a healthy wariness, but it is none of those things. It is the complex, defending the only territory it has ever known how to survive in. And notice something else, hiding inside this same mechanism. The complex often mistakes intensity for depth. It feels the racing heart, the checked phone, the rehearsed sentence deleted and rewritten 3 times, and it reports back to you that this must mean something important is happening, when in truth, all that has happened is that an old alarm has gone off. Intensity is not evidence of love, it is often only evidence of an old emergency being triggered again. Which brings us to the third consideration. And here is where Jung actually offers something like hope, though he never once phrased it as comfort, he phrased it as work, plain, unglamorous work. The complex loses its authority in exact proportion to how clearly it is seen, not managed, not white-knuckled through with willpower, not reasoned away in a single insight, seen, repeatedly, calmly, the way you would watch weather pass rather than fight it. So here is a practice worth taking seriously. After the next time you feel that unmistakable pull towards someone who is giving you very little, do what might be called a trigger post-mortem. Sit down afterward, alone, with no one to perform the insight for, and ask 3 plain questions. What exactly did this person do or fail to do right before the pull got strong? What did that moment remind me of? Not think about, remind me of. In the body, in the stomach, in the old familiar tightening of the chest. And what did I actually do next? Did I reach out again within the hour? Did I sit by the phone rehearsing his silence? Did I explain his coldness away to a friend who was clearly not convinced? Write the honest answers down, without editing them into a more flattering story. And do not be surprised if the first few times you try this, the old voice objects loudly, insisting this one is different, insisting the pattern does not apply here. That objection is itself worth writing down, because it is usually the complex's last and cleverest move, arguing for its own exemption, and do this again the next time it happens, and again the time after that. Jung believed the unconscious speaks most clearly through pattern, rather than through any single incident. A complex traced once is merely interesting. A complex traced 5 times across 5 separate nights becomes very difficult to keep denying. And once it becomes undeniable, something quietly shifts. The complex does not vanish. Complexes rarely vanish entirely. Jung never promised that kind of clean ending, but it loses its grip on the wheel, bit by bit, and you begin to feel the pull arrive and recognize it in real time as the old weather rather than as fresh evidence about this new person. And recognized while it is still happening, it can be set down gently, the way you might notice your hand gripping a railing far too tightly and simply, deliberately, loosen it. I trace the complex until it can no longer hide inside my choices. The 6th key is this, and it is the quiet one to end on. None of this means you go looking for a better type, the way you might shop for a better coat. Jung was suspicious of that kind of self-improvement, because it still leaves the complex fully intact. Only redirected toward a new target, what actually changes the pattern is not finding worthier people, it is withdrawing the old charge from the whole category of coldness itself, so that when it appears again, and it will appear again, because the world is full of distant and half-interested people, it simply does not light up the same old machinery. Imagine a man who finally does the work, who traces his complex through a dozen ordinary evenings, who sees clearly now that a certain kind of vague reply used to send a current through his whole body. And one Saturday morning, a new person is genuinely kind to him without effort, answers quickly, remembers small details, asks how he slept, and for the first time in his life, nothing in his chest performs its old trick. No current, no urgency, no need to check his phone, and his first thought, quietly, is a small flicker of loss, as if something familiar has gone missing from the room. That flicker is not proof the work failed, it is proof the work is nearly finished. Because the complex, starved of its usual meal, goes quiet before the rest of him catches up to why quiet finally feels like peace rather than absence. This is slow work. Jung never promised otherwise. He never offered a clean before and after, a single insight, and a rewritten life. He offered instead a lifelong relationship with your own depths, a willingness to sit with the same feeling-toned scene again and again, until it stops running you from underneath the floor of your awareness. And there is real mercy in this, if you let yourself feel it, because it means you were never actually choosing badly out of some flaw stitched into your character. You were following an old map drawn by a child who needed to survive a particular kind of love, drawn in a hurry, drawn in the dark, drawn with whatever materials that child had on hand. And that child did the best possible job with impossible instructions. The map does not need to be burned in anger. It does not need to be mourned forever either. It needs only to be studied calmly, turned over in the light, understood for what it was trying to do, until at last you can set it down without shame, and begin sketching a new one with open eyes. One ordinary evening, one honest noticing. At a time, I release the old map without shame for having followed it this far. Here is the whole picture. The pull you feel is not chemistry. It is a complex recognizing familiar weather. That complex has a favorite stimulus, a particular flavor of distance it mistakes for love. An ordinary week will show you the pattern if you actually watch it instead of living inside it. The complex acts faster than your ego can object, which is why it has felt like fate rather than choice. Traced patiently across enough real incidents, the complex loses its grip without needing to be destroyed. And the whole task was never to hunt down worthier people, it was to withdraw the ancient charge from coldness itself, so that warmth finally has room to register as warmth. All 6 of these were never 6 separate keys. They were one key, turned 6 times. The recognition that what you keep meeting outside was first formed inside, in a room, in a history, in a child who learned love the hard way. So let it rest here for a moment. I notice the pull before I obey it. I trace it back to the room where it was born, instead of the person standing in front of me. Now I give the old map its due respect, and still choose to draw a new one. Say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. Again, I make the unconscious conscious. And if you are still wondering why the ones who value you least keep finding their way to your door, ask instead, what door in you has been standing open for them all along? And whether tonight might be the night you finally notice your own hand on the latch.